May then I'm delighted to be chairing this second in our series of seminars. And we're starting off with a paper from Facundo Rodriguez. And I've known Facundo for a number of years, since it was my great pleasure to supervise him for an MPhil thesis when he was talking about Suarez in what for me was a very interesting way. He's now, having done his PhD in Cambridge, a lecturer in ethics at King's College London, and works on moral psychology, ethics, Kant's philosophy, and metaethics and their intersections. And his articles include Thomas Hobbes's substantially constrained absolutism, the fundamental law of the Commonwealth as a substantial constraint on sovereign power, and reconstructing Kant's teleological moral realism. Facundo's current project is on loneliness and shared agency, and the paper that you're giving today is based on a forthcoming article in Ergo, and it's titled "The Prison of the Self: The Politics of Loneliness, Autonomy, and Togetherness." So over to you, Facundo.
Great, thank you very much, John, for the introduction. I was hoping to share my screen. I'll try to do that. Let me see. Should be. Can you see my presentation there? Great. Okay. So yes, thank you very much, John, for the presentation and also for inviting me to the seminar. I'm really happy to be presenting this work to you, and hopefully I can get some comments and good questions as well. And thank you, Aaron, for organizing today's seminar, for your help putting this together. So as John said, today I'm going to present to you the central thesis that I defend in a paper forthcoming in Ergo. So actually the title of the talk changed slightly. So I dropped the politics off because I just couldn't fit everything into one single presentation. So there is kind of political implications that I'm interested in, and I would like to discuss them towards the end of the session. I'm trying to locate your faces so I can see my presentation. So as John said, now I'm still working on loneliness. So this is a kind of in a way still work in progress. So the account is out there, but I'm still hopefully writing kind of a book-length project on loneliness. And one of the main areas of research is kind of thinking about the political implications of my account of loneliness and what I'm going to say today. So before we start, I wanted to give you some of the thoughts of why I thought this would be a good topic to discuss in the seminar. This is not something I will defend in the rest of the talk, but I still think could be some thoughts to have while you listen to the talk. So first, I have this sense that a concern with loneliness is kind of central to non-liberal political philosophy. So I'm not saying that kind of liberal philosophy has nothing to say about loneliness or nothing interesting to say about loneliness. I just have the feeling that people who find liberal philosophy to be unsatisfying tend to have a concern with loneliness and related kind of values. Secondly, what I'm going to propose as kind of the way out of the prison of the self, so the way out of loneliness, is in the sort of relations and institutions that I think communitarians take an interest in and find valuable. And so I see myself as also giving an explanation for why these relations and institutions might be of value. Thirdly, and relatedly, so my account is kind of deeply Kantian, and underlying my work, my PhD work, and my current work is kind of an attempt to reconsider our reading of Kant. And in particular, I think we should not think of Kant as kind of the central figure in liberal individualism. In fact, I think we should see Kant as putting forward a form of communitarianism. I think his category of community is central to his moral ideal. And I defend this more in some other papers in other work, but this will come up when we discuss his account of friendship. And lastly, I think, so Kantian autonomy should not be understood as kind of a value that puts people apart or that we should kind of exercise individually, but actually kind of part of the conditions of the possibility of a valuable union with other people. And this is, I think, similar to what Skorupski discussed in a previous meeting of the seminar. So this idea of being at one with the other, he attributed to Hegel. It's obviously in Hegel, but I think it's already in Kant. So there is this communitarian strand that I want to bring out. Okay, so those were kind of just preliminary remarks. So we can just now focus on the paper. So the starting point of my paper and my thinking about loneliness is actually not a philosopher and not Kant. It's Sylvia Plath, who you can see there standing in Newnham College, not far away from where John is at the moment, I think. So Plath wrote had kind of this personal diary that she wrote when she was an undergraduate when in the US. She went back home at some point, holidays, and then came back to college, was sitting alone in her room, feeling quite sad and lonely, and wrote the following diary entry, which I find quite illuminating on the nature of loneliness and on the grip loneliness has on us. So she writes, now I know what loneliness is, I think. It comes from a vague core of the self, like a disease of the blood, dispersed throughout the body so that one cannot locate the matrix, the spot of contagion. I can't deceive myself out of the bare, stark realization that no matter how enthusiastic you are, no matter how sure that character is fate, nothing is real, past or future, when you are alone in your room with the clock ticking loudly into the false, cheerful brilliance of the electric light. And if you have no past or future, which after all is all that the present is made of, why then you may as well dispose of the empty shell of present and commit suicide. God, but life is loneliness. Despite the opiates, despite the shrill gaiety of parties with no purpose, despite the false grinning faces we all wear. Yes, there is joy, fulfillment, and companionship, but the loneliness of the soul, in its appalling self-consciousness, is horrible and overpowering. So I think Plath's diary entry is heart-wrenching, of course, and desperate and kind of sadly premonitory as well. But in all its sadness, it is also one of the most insightful descriptions of loneliness I came across, and also of the gravity of loneliness. And in this paper and the presentation, I want to take Plath's suggestion seriously. So loneliness, it seems to me, is a disease that arises from the core of the self, from the soul in its appalling self-consciousness, as she put it. To defend this claim and develop Plath's suggestion, I want to turn to Kant. So like Plath, Kant thought that what lies at the core of the self is our capacity for self-consciousness. It is in fact our self-consciousness, he thinks, what raises us up infinitely above all other beings on earth, he says. It is what makes us persons, what gives us our dignity. But, and this is what interests me, he was also well aware that self-consciousness can turn the self into a prison, as he put it. But while Plath thought that life is loneliness, that the fact that loneliness was connected to our self-consciousness made it kind of inescapable, Kant remained hopeful that there is a way out of the prison of the self. And I share Kant's hope as well. So this is the plan for today's presentation. So I will first explain how, according to Kant, self-consciousness opens an abyss between the noumenal I, who is active and free, and the whole empirical world that we experience as being passive and determined. I close the first part of the discussion by arguing that loneliness is the painful experience of standing on the brink of this abyss that self-consciousness opens. And then I move on to the second part, the kind of positive part. And there I present Kant's view that friendship is a form of shared agency and that therefore it can be an escape from the prison of the self. Sorry. In the closing 5 minutes of the talk, I will consider some how my Kantian account can explain why sometimes we are loved and yet we are still very lonely. So let's start with the abyss. So Kant thinks that as self-conscious beings, as rational beings, there are two standpoints from which we can regard ourselves. So as members of the sensible world and as members of this world of understanding. Sorry. I think it's the season. It's like terrible. There are these two standpoints that we can take towards ourselves. So the sensible world, for those who are maybe not acquainted with transcendental philosophy, is the world of things as they appear to our sensibility. So they appear under conditions of time and space, and as completely causally determined by laws of nature. The laws of nature kind of hold together this spatio-temporal world. But apart from experiencing the world outside of ourselves, Kant says that we can also turn our experience towards ourselves and become an object of our own sense, of our sensibility. And we can do that in two ways. So outwardly, we can kind of experience ourselves as a body extended in space, but we can also do that inwardly and take our thoughts, dreams, hopes, memories, kind of psychological phenomena as the object of our inner sense, our inner experience. When we do that, kind of we experience our mental activity as a string of thoughts in time, kind of causally linked. And what is important is that in this picture of the empirical world and of ourselves as an object in the empirical world, we are nothing but a physical and psychological happening. So from this standpoint, we are conscious of what we undergo, what happens to us. So we experience ourselves as a mere passive link in the infinite chain of determined natural events that constitutes the sensible or empirical world. Now, because we are rational beings and self-conscious, self-consciousness opens a second standpoint that we can take towards ourselves. And we can take this second standpoint because we are self-conscious in a really specific sense, Kant thinks. So we are capable of saying, I do and I think. The idea here is that when we act or think, we are conscious of what we are doing, even if our doing or thinking is not itself part of the content of a thought, of a kind of second-order thinking. I think Henry Allison explains this quite elegantly. The idea is that self-consciousness is not another thing that we do when we are acting or thinking, but it's actually an inseparable component of the first-order activity itself, which is a kind of self-conscious activity as the activity of a rational creature. This is how I like to put it. So for Kant, we are self-conscious of our activity as such. This has kind of two aspects. First, we are conscious of our thinking and our doing as an action, so not a mere happening. And secondly, we are conscious of ourselves as the kind of doer of that doing or the thinker of that thinking. So in that sense, we are conscious of our activity as such. So as activity and also of ourselves as kind of the doer behind that doing. So it's properly our activity. So self-consciousness, in this sense, is consciousness of what I do, not of what happens to me. If I am self-conscious of what I do, I cannot think of myself as a kind of mere cog in the mechanics of nature, as Kant says, bound by causal determination. I need to think of myself as a being with spontaneity, with free will, to whom deeds can be attributed. Because self-consciousness is just a form of attributing deeds to ourselves. And so in this respect, and in this standpoint, I am conscious of myself as a spontaneous agent. And Kant obviously thinks that it is because we are conscious of ourselves as spontaneous agents that we actually are spontaneous agents. And he thinks that this is what raises us infinitely above all other beings on earth, and that because of this we are persons, and so we have dignity. But interestingly, he also suggests that self-consciousness is the cause of the human fall. So I want to turn to that kind of more pessimistic side of Kantian self-consciousness. So there is this text called The Conjectural Beginning of Human History, where Kant tells the story of the birth of self-consciousness, kind of based on very loosely on the book of Genesis. And I think that the story Kant tells in that particular text, points to the perils of self-consciousness and to how loneliness might be just like Plath thought, a condition that comes with self-consciousness. So here's the story that Kant shares with us. So the story starts with a couple in a garden, he says. This couple could walk and think, but the point is that at first they were only guided by instinct. So basically they followed their smell. It was that guided them to food that was nourishing for them and good for them. So the couple at first just obeyed this call of nature, Kant says, and so they did well for themselves. But Kant says that reason soon began, kind of got in the way in some way. It's began to stir. And reason did this in two different ways. So it was like a two-stage process. The first is kind of more innocent, the human being starting using other senses, so sight and touch, and using reason to compare objects. So let's suppose that the human being was attracted to a certain type of fruit through smell. Then they would see another fruit, think, oh, these are really similar. Maybe we could try eating this new fruit. They did, and so they discovered a new fruit that they could eat to be kind of nourished and healthy. So for Kant, that is kind of an expansion of our instinctual repertoire or something like that. But the point is that reason went further. So by following the example of an animal, says Kant, so we can assume that this is kind of a snake, whose nature was suited to gratifications as was, on the contrary, disadvantageous to the human being. One of the two humans, we can call her Eve, became aware of the possibility of acting against her instinct. So she became aware of the possibility of choosing food on grounds other than the capacity of the food to nourish her. In doing so, Kant thinks, she became aware of the ground on which she acts, and so of the possibility of choosing kind of the grounds of her action. So instinct now was not kind of the ruler. She freed herself from instinct. Instinct became, Kant says, a mere incentive for action. She could kind of follow instinct or decide not to follow instinct. So compulsion by instinct disappeared. And Kant says that Eve's bite from the apple was the first attempt at a free choice of a human being, and this opened the eyes of the human being. So Eve, with her self-conscious eyes wide open, discovered in herself a faculty of choosing for herself a way of life and not being bound to a single one, as other animals are, freeing herself from instinct. And Kant says that at first we should kind of picture Eve taken in momentary delight after the discovery of this marked superiority over other animals. But we should remember that this story is not just the story of the birth of self-consciousness, it is also the story of kind of our fall. So Eve's delight, intense as it might have been, was equally short-lived, says Kant. And he says, anxiety and fright must have followed right away, for Eve stood on the brink of an abyss. Now, what is this abyss that Eve is facing at this moment when she became self-conscious and free? So I think first it is the abyss of the reflective distance that she gained between the active I that is kind of conscious of itself, deliberating and deciding what to do, and the passive empirical self on which instinct and inclination are acting. But the abyss is also the gap, I think, that self-consciousness opens between the noumenal self and the whole empirical world, of which obviously the empirical self is a part, but only just one part. So I want to suggest that it is not just anxiety and fright that Eve must have felt when the kind of silence of freedom replaced the strident command of instinct. Eve, I think, must have also felt desperately lonely. She must have felt lonely because, conscious of herself as an active I, she could only find outside of herself an indifferent world, a silent world of mere happenings, mute, if of course strikingly beautiful, but a chain of occurrences blindly dictated by laws of nature. So standing on the brink of this abyss that put Eve apart from the passive world outside her, I imagine Eve feeling very, very lonely. Now, what can we learn from this story? So if Kant is right, the story of self-consciousness is also the story of the human fall. If I am right, the story of our fall is also the story of our loneliness. As Plas suggested in the passage I read at the beginning, it is the loneliness of the I in its appalling self-consciousness that we suffer when we feel lonely. What Kant is kind of adding to that initial thought is an account of the nature of self-consciousness. So we are self-conscious of ourselves as an active I, as a member of the noumenal world, to put it in Kantian terminology. So loneliness is something that we suffer when we take ourselves as agents to be alone. And this is kind of the key claim I'm putting forward. So we're lonely when we take ourselves to be alone in the exercise of our agency. So in a way, there is nothing more to loneliness than mere aloneness. Being lonely, however, is being alone not in the empirical world, the spatio-temporal world of mere happenings, but in the noumenal one, the world of active agents. So we can think of, again, of Eve in the garden. So before Adam also ate the apple, Eve was lonely, even if she was not alone in the garden, spatio-temporally. She had a partner and other creatures around her. I think this Kantian thought captures a common experience of anyone who has been at some point lonely. The idea that we can feel lonely even at the loudest of parties. And this goes back to Plath's kind of original diary entry. There she describes that she was alone in her room, but actually she was not alone in the house. She could hear the people coming in and going to the kitchen, moving around. And yet she says, there was no living being on earth at that moment except myself. And the philosophical point, I think, is that if loneliness is being alone in the noumenal world, we cannot escape it by changing the empirical relations that hold between ourselves and other appearances, even the appearances of other free agents. That is because the abyss cannot be bridged by a change in our empirical situations, for it is an abyss that precisely separates us from that empirical situation, that empirical world. So causal, spatial, and temporal relations do not relate our noumenal selves or our active agencies. And so they do very little to soothe our loneliness. So I have given you now my account. I want to now kind of turn to the solution, because I think there is one. So Plath, remember, says that because loneliness is so connected to our self-consciousness, it is inescapable. She says life is loneliness, despite all the opiates, despite the shrill vulgarity of parties with no purpose, despite the false grinning faces we all wear. I mean, we can distract ourselves, but at the end, loneliness is there is no way out. Luckily, I think Plath is wrong. Of course, I think that she was kind of in the grip of loneliness, and it's very difficult to see a way out sometimes when you are feeling lonely. But ultimately, I think she was wrong. And Kant shares my optimism. He believes that loneliness can be overcome, and in fact, he thinks it's a duty to overcome our loneliness. The escape he proposes is other people, and in particular, our friends. And friendship in part is kind of the solution that Kant put forward, in part because he has a particular idea of what friendship entails. So this is kind of one of the passages that I kind of like the most of his writings. So he says that a man can shut himself up in himself as in a prison, but once he finds a friend, so he says someone intelligent, someone who moreover shares his general outlook on things, with whom he need not be anxious about revealing himself with complete confidence, the doors of the prison, he promises, will open. So why is this? So Kant has a very peculiar understanding of friendship, one that I find deeply attractive. And also that I think is a key to a better understanding of his whole moral project, kind of in line with what I was saying at the beginning of the talk. So I think this is the key to unlocking a better understanding of his moral philosophy as a whole. Central to his account is the idea that friends constitute a unity of will. This is also something that he discusses when talking about marriage, for example. How does this work? So how do we come to constitute this unity of will with our friends? So first, when I befriend someone, I make out of love for my friend. He sends my own ends. So I come to kind of acquire the ends of the other person. But because friendship is reciprocal and mutual, at the same time, I am acquiring the other person's ends. My friend is kind of taking my ends as his own. So we have this reciprocal relation. As a result of this reciprocity, Kant says, we kind of acquire reciprocal possession of each other. What he has in mind is kind of that we have practical authority over the other. So my will is guided by the will of my friend, and yet the will of my friend is guided by my own will, which is in turn guided by their will. So this recursive structure puts normative pressure on our wills to converge on one single united will. So in sharing authority over each other, we share a kind of deliberative standpoint. And I think this is where I see the connection to, as I was saying, Skorovsky's discussion of Hegel and this idea of limitation without constraint. I think Kant has something like that in mind here. So in Kant's view, kind of my friend directing of my will is intertwined with my directing of their will, so that in fact I am subjective to someone else's will, but in a way that is not constraining, because that will is not alien to my will. It's in fact kind of part of my will and directed by my own will. But the key takeaway here is that friendship for Kant is an ideal of shared agency. He says that friendship is the union of persons whereby they feel and think in common. This, of course, does not mean that we are physically one with our friends. We are just one person. Remember that the will is what makes us part of the noumenal world. So the unity in our wills is not an empirical relation. In friendship, we are united through the reciprocal authority that we have over each other. So there are two things worth highlighting about Kant's account of friendship. So the first is that what follows from this picture is that friends are first and foremost partners in a common project. Because for Kant, we share the authority to determine ends for each other. With our friends, we must deliberate together about the ends that we are going to kind of jointly pursue. When we succeed in choosing these ends with our united will, we then take these ends as a common project. And we take each other as a kind of partner in a common pursuit. What is this common pursuit? Well, in the ideal, with our friends, we share our life. That is the project that we share. But the point is that we do share a project, just an open-ended one. The second point is that this picture of friendship contrasts with a competing picture that is also quite common in contemporary philosophy and in the history of philosophy, that is thinking of friendship is what I call the benefactor view of friendship. The idea here is that to be friends with someone is to kind of pursue their best interest or further their well-being. In this benefactor view of friendship, my well-being is in a way a source of tasks that my friend individually must accomplish for my own sake. So in the benefactor view, a friend is a recipient of favors more than a partner in kind of shared efforts. Whereas for Kant, when I act for the sake of my friend, I do not just act with her well-being in mind, I also act guided by her will, which is in turn guided by mine. So I act from maxims that we share all the way down. This contrast is brought out quite nicely by Kyla Evels-Dugan in a paper in the journal Ethics that I highly recommend. Okay, so I think that with this account of friendship, we can really explain why friendship is an escape from the prison of the self, an escape from our loneliness, given how I think we should understand loneliness. So to put it briefly again, friendship for Kant is an ideal of shared agency. So I can, to steal a nice sentence from Christine Korsgaard, when we become friends, we come together, we meet in the noumenal world. And it is precisely because we form a unity of will with our friends that friendship offers an escape from the prison of the self, from our loneliness. When we have friends, we are no longer alone on this side of the abyss. There is someone else with us, someone to whom we are connected, not physically, but through our agency or will. It is not just me, conscious of myself as a free noumenal being, standing on the brink of the abyss, facing a world of mere happenings in which I must find my way. I have a friend, a fellow agent, just like me, standing by my side, sharing the deliberative standpoint, and with whom I can think and act. So in friendship, the active I is replaced by a shared active we. Now, you might be thinking, shared agency is a much more common occurrence than in friendship. It's much cheaper than friendship. And I think, but I would agree, and Kant definitely would agree. So when Kant is talking about the unity of will, he uses this term to discuss friendship, but also romantic relationships, so marriage, political relations. So the omnilateral will comes out in his Doctrine of Right to discuss the relationship between citizens. And also in my reading of Kant, at least, any rightful interaction is a exercise of joint willing. So we can think like walking, having a conversation, watching a movie with someone else are all encounters with a fellow agent. Walking together in a way is not walking guided by each of our independent unilateral wills, but it's really walking guided by our shared united will. That is the idea. And so my proposal is the following. So to escape the prison of the self, we simply need a partner in the noumenal world. We need a fellow agent to think and act with us. So doing something with someone, being self-conscious of oneself as part of a we, of a collective moral person, is how we escape the horrible and overpowering loneliness of the self-conscious I. Now, in the next 5 minutes, the last maybe 2 minutes of the talk, I just wanted to give you a brief sense of what we can say about instances where we are hoping for an escape from the prison of loneliness, and yet those hopes are kind of not successful. Our escape fails. So one view would be to say, well, what you need to not be lonely is love. Basically, love will prevent you from feeling lonely. And this, in fact, was the view put forward by Kieran Setia in a recent book. He thinks that the problem, we are lonely when basically we don't have someone, say a friend or a loved one, to reassure us that we matter and that we matter unconditionally. He says that while others may treat us with distant respect, our worth as a human being is unappreciated and engaged when our friends are not around. But the problem with a view like this is that sometimes we feel deeply loved. We know that we matter and that we matter to other people, and still we feel deeply, deeply lonely. I witnessed this recently with a family member who started suffering from dementia, and she expressed that she was, even if she was seeing much more of her family and friends and loved ones, she felt like deeply lonely, maybe more lonely than ever she did before in her life. So she was loved, yet she was deeply lonely. So what does an account like Setia miss? Putting the emphasis on just love. And I think here we can go back to this distinction between the benefactor and Kantian view of loving relationships. So I think what an account like Setia's fails to capture is that the love that assures us that we matter and that we matter unconditionally can fall short of the love that makes us feel less lonely. The love of the benefactor, to go back to that distinction, might be enough to make us feel that we matter and that we matter unconditionally. When someone does something with our well-being in mind, they affirm that the unconditional value that we have as beings whose life can go better or worse. It's kind of the unconditional value of being a sentient being. But as we saw, this sort of love is not why friendship is an escape from the prison of the self, at least in my picture. The love of the benefactor, through that love, our unconditional value is engaged, but our agency is not engaged. The benefactor meets us not in the nominal world as a fellow agent with whom we can share his efforts, but in the empirical one, where we are but a body to be looked after or a collection of memories and dreams to be investigated. I think this kind of explains the loneliness of my family member. When someone suffering from dementia or cognitive decline, we try to engage with them as fellow agents, but at some point it becomes impossible and very dangerous. So kind of the benefactor, the position of the benefactor becomes kind of welcomed by both parties. But that acceptance does nothing to soothe the pain of seeing the abyss opening up again between us. Do I have a few more minutes? I can stop here.
I mean, yeah. I mean, two minutes really at the most, because we want to have some time for discussion.
Yeah, I do as well. So maybe I think let's stop here. I was just going to say why kind of not any type of shared agency kind of is enough to feel less lonely. But we can, I mean, if that's come up, we can discuss it in the Q&A.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think that's probably better. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. So perhaps I see we've already got a question from Tom Anger, and then one following from Aaron. Could unless you want to, and then one from Lawrence. Unless you want to, could we unshare the screen?
Yes.
Now? Yeah. Thank you. So Tom, you got in first.
Well, thanks very much, Facundo. It was a very interesting talk. I suppose I just want to question the scaffolding of the talk, which is very, very Kantian. So it seems you proceed on Kantian assumptions with what I think is his rather strange metaphysics of noumena and phenomena. Not clear to me why we should accept that framing. I mean, from an Aristotelian type perspective, we're embodied agents and we experience others necessarily through our embodiment. And that is, I think, in many ways classically expressed through the relation between women and children, especially mothers and small children, right? So that there's no possibility of elucidating that relationship without reference to the body. And so the shared activity, the shared ends just wouldn't be there if you sort of restricted them to some kind of noumenal agency. So I want to say, well, why should we accept this framing in the first place?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That's a really important question. So maybe I want to say two things. So first, I'm taking a very kind of minimal interpretation of the distinction. So unlike kind of other Kantians who have this kind of pretty metaphysically robust distinction between noumenal and phenomena, I prefer a more minimal understanding of this as just two ways in which we can conceive of ourselves. And you can even take this to be kind of phenomenological. It seemed to us that we can both understand ourselves as just part of causal change of events and part of the empirical world, an object outside as just any other object, and at the same time think of ourselves as this being that is capable of acting freely. And that is all I need from the Kantian. I just like also this talk of two worlds, because they also, I think it tracks the spatial metaphors we use when we talk about ourselves as agents, as being alone, and this. So this is what I'm taking. But I do take your point on embodiment, and I don't want to kind of ignore the embodied aspect. I just think that embodiment matters when it matters to the agent who is kind of embodied, right? So I might really, and it might be part of my nature. I mean, this could be the case that there are some activities that are kind of embodied. So, for example, love might be embodied. You need a hug. This is, and that is fine. For me, this is an activity you can share with someone else. You can hug someone else. You can kiss. You can. But you want the agent to be engaging with you in a joint project, even if it's a joint embodied project. So yes, but maybe it's
that's a good comeback. I just very briefly would say that the very description of the empirical field, as you call it, as having objects in it, and that's as a paradigm mode of description. I think that's tendentious, right? I think our relation to other animals and particularly humans is not like that. So we distinguish objects from subjects in our experience. So the phenomenology is different from what you're. But anyway, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
So thank you. So it's now Aaron, your turn.
Thank you very much, Facundo. I really enjoyed that paper. My question follows Tom's actually, because as you were speaking, I thought to myself, why Kant, in the first place? I was thinking specifically of Dilthey's critique of that kind of rationalistic philosophy when he says, no real blood flows through the knowing subject, of Kant, it's just mere thought activity. And so my question was, why Kant in the first place, in the sense that, Kant is responding or critiquing and essentially trying to transcend, the logical ground of Leibniz and Wolff especially. But at the same time, you've got this whole movement with neoclassicism and the romanticism as well shortly after, with Winckelmann at the start, but really Herder, and Herder was Kant's student, of course, but Herder tried to take this notion of a rational agent away from Kant and argue for Empfindung, a feeling for the historical, a feeling for the sacred. And I just wondered, it was just really, again, just to follow Tom's question, why did you, when you think of loneliness, why did you, see Kant as a liberator from that? I suppose I think I was thinking, if I was going to recommend a rom-com to somebody, I wouldn't recommend Schindler's List. Is a kind of really sharp, thinker to go back to for loneliness.
Yeah, I think thank you, Aaron. That's really good. I think that's a fair worry. I mean, there is a biographical kind of answer to this. I really like Kant, and I find it kind of really interesting. And I was concerned with loneliness, and just when you have some tools, like the solutions, they all look like the same thing, and you're using what you have. So that is one answer. But also because I do feel like I do feel this distinction between the so there are two things. One, I do like how Kant does kind of philosophy in the first person, the first personal perspective. I think that is really valuable, and I think there is nothing tendentious about that necessarily. And I think that was key for loneliness, and kind of much better than kind of contemporary attempts to just do loneliness in kind of the moral psychological way of. I really wanted to pin it down to kind of more kind of the structure of the mind in a way. I felt it was kind of a deep phenomenon, and Kant gives you like a system, so at least that I wanted the systematic aspect and the first personal aspect, and so Kant also, being the philosopher, one of the philosophers I like the most, seemed like a natural. But also I feel like a lot of people think that I'm kind of more of a post-Kantian than kind of, some people are interested in Kant coming from like early modern, and some other people are interested in Kant because they are interested in exactly kind of romantic movement and kind of post-Kantian, Hegelian stuff. And I think my reading of Kant places me kind of the post-Kantian rather than pre-Kantian. So I think that's pretty good. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So now it's Lawrence then, and we have two more people now who have questions after that. So we shouldn't be too long, I think, with the questions and answers.
No idea what you might be hinting at, John. I think my question really follows on from Tom's and Aaron's. I mean, I understood your paper as a paper in Kantianism, but I've really struggled to understand it as a paper in Kant. And what I mean by that is that the phenomenal and the noumenal is a distinction that Kant establishes in order to defend the particularity of the finitude of human reason. The noumenal is, strictly speaking, it's something he takes over from scholasticism, and why he locks it out, as it were, because that is, the noumenal is the way things are known if one is a divine figure or if one is God. And so I'm really struggling with your notion of noumenal agency and what these noumenal agents are. And because that seems to me to belong, agency in that sense seems to me to belong much more to the question of the second critique. And where, in other words, I couldn't prize apart the question of affect from the question of understanding. And to give you an example of why that I struggle with it, your constant use of the phrase, "we are lonely." Now, I can understand loneliness as the positing of the lack of the experience of the we. But as it were, to try to identify something which is lonely in and of itself, which looks like a noumenal object to me, but you can't get there, because the very experience of loneliness posits the absence of something which could otherwise be there. In other words, it's present in its absence. It's a phenomenon. And why I struggle with this is because the burden of that, of the understanding, the Verstand, is in order to give you some access to a world in which people are in, or in which they're not. But it presupposes that world always is in some way. And that's where I wondered why we were slipping, but it struck me at least, why we were slipping between the first and the second critique. I don't know if you can unravel that for me.
Thank you very much. That's yeah, many interesting things. I like the idea of the presence of an absence. I think that's a good way of putting what loneliness is, in general, not just in Kant. It seems like there is something like that going on with loneliness. Then I mean, I see this paper not so much as a kind of interpretation of Kant, or trying to contribute to Kantian scholarship. I'm just placing a contribution to moral psychology within a roughly Kantian tradition. This is, I think, clear, a little bit more transparent in the written version of the paper, where I have all these kind of provisos and footnotes around this. But essentially, I'm understanding that this kind of noumenal agency as the agent that is in the intelligible world, or the world of understanding, or these different ways. What comes up in the third section of the groundwork, and also in the metaphysics of morals. Then you mentioned affect, which I think is important, because there is, and this is something kind of many Kantians kind of objected to, is kind of, well, how can you have a feeling of loneliness as a noumenal agent? This is a feeling, it seems to be kind of in the wrong place. And I agree, but I also think, like, in the Kantian tradition, you have many feelings that generate similar concerns. So kind of reactive attitudes seem to also generate the same problem. They are kind of engaged, feelings that are engaged with the intelligible in ways that might be puzzling. So yeah, I don't think there is anything particular about loneliness in that respect. But yes, again, I'm not attributing to Kant a view about loneliness in any way. And to go back to some of the previous questions, some people would say, well, you're generating yourself a problem by just, I mean, this is a problem that Kant has because of his transcendental idealism. It's isolating the self. I mean, it's a kind of solipsistic philosophy. So actually, if you are not a Kantian, you will not be as lonely as you think you are. So yes, but that's something more to think about. Thank you, Lawrence.
Gudrun.
Yeah, thank you very much for the paper. I am sort of following it from the previous questions to you. I've written on Kant on friendship many, many years ago, and I don't remember the details, but I was struck at the reluctance Kant expressed and the worries he had about sharing feelings with your friend. He really said you have to be very, very careful about that. So the reciprocity that we understand existing between friends, that is hedged with all sorts of caveats by Kant. And I remember clearly he sort of says, friendship is good, but it's very, very rare. And he says, you probably remember that, it's as rare as black swans. So this is all I want to say. I think you are very optimistic about Kant's friendship, which I don't share. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's completely true. He says that, then he's kind of going back and back to this phrase, "My friend, there are no friends." So he's really kind of fond of that phrase, and I think that's right. But what I think is that his suspicions around friendship have to do with like a form of non-ideal theory. He thinks it's quite dangerous because just people can abuse your trust. So he's really concerned with you revealing secrets that people can use against you. He's really concerned about excessive love generating lack of respect and these things. But as I see it, I think that is a problem with kind of non-ideal conditions. But if you think about the ethical community of the religion, I think actually that is just a friendship among kind of a totality of human beings. So I think the Kantian moral ideal is a form of friendship. Just the problem is like to get there, you have to open up, and in opening up, you kind of make yourself vulnerable. And Kant is kind of suspicious of that. He's worried about that. But I have an optimistic reading of Kant, yes, on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Edward.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. I partly wanted to check the microphone because I'm going to be on next. Is it? Yes? Thank you. I didn't really have a question, just a comment, which is that I was intrigued by Kant's interpretation of the story of the fall, because in his interpretation, it isn't really a fall at all. I mean, yes, Eve may start to feel lonely after eating the apple, but in every other way, it's an unequivocal gain. It's I mean, it's a emergence from animality. So it's very different from the traditional Christian interpretation, isn't it? It's actually much more like a very ancient interpretation, which I think was common among some Gnostics, which saw the story of Adam and Eve's fall as really a story of liberation from imprisonment by the demiurge, Satan being the great liberator. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to your talk. But thank you for this. Yeah, actually, I don't know if there is any kind of any source for or Kant is thinking about any particular interpretation of the Book of Genesis when he's writing this. I think he's answering to someone, but he wasn't concerned really with interpreting the really the Book of Genesis in any way. Actually, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek throughout the whole book. He's not doing this seriously. And I think one of the reasons is the one you point out. I mean, this doesn't seem like a true fall, even if he's concerned with kind of this anxiety that is quite existentialist in a way. Kind of, he's really concerned with how freedom comes with anxiety and worries around, well, making yourself freely, independently. Something that he also discusses in his kind of this well-known essay on the Enlightenment. Kind of, you have to make yourself responsible now, and I think this is the theme rather. But it's really interesting. I think it would be an interesting paper to look at different interpretations of that passage and see whether Kant aligns with some of of those. Thank you.
Yes. So I had my question then. Now, suppose there's a company which is, let's say, trying to get everybody to take out their lovely windows and replace them with double glazed or triple glazed ones, and they're running a big campaign, and they've employed thousands of people from all over the world on this phone campaign, and the phone campaign is very well adjusted. That's say there's to everybody who's involved in it, it's clear what they've got to do, what they're trying to achieve, which is to get people to buy these windows, how they do it, and they launch into this campaign. It seems to me that by your definition, all the people involved in that campaign are friends. They're engaged in this shared project. Compare my relationship to somebody I consider my dearest friend, and this is somebody, well, I think once we were engaged in a common project which was trying to teach me to drive, which failed miserably. But otherwise, we've had no common projects together. We disagree on almost everything. I don't even think it's a beneficence model that one of us feels particularly the benefactor of another. We enjoy each other's company. We enjoy being together and doing things together. And I think we really are friends. And we're certainly much more friends than the person on the telephone campaign in India and the person on the telephone campaign in Thailand who've never met each other.
Yes, that's a great question. So thank you, because this is an opportunity to discuss what I didn't manage to discuss during the talk. So this is the sort of concern that someone could have with this kind of shared agency solution to loneliness. I think we need to distinguish friendship as a particular form of shared agency, and I think this does not have to do with the content of the activity we are engaged in some way, but yes, with the kind of extent. So I think that friendship is sharing one's life. That is the project that you're sharing with a friend. And what I take that to mean is that you may, and you probably do, share a lot of first order kind of projects. You might be kind of co-authored with a friend and write a paper together. You might paint your house with a friend. So these are kind of first order projects. But then you have a second order project that is, you're trying to make a life out of all these kind of first order projects. I think your friend is definitely a partner in that second order project. And so he sees all your life as practically relevant to them. So I see this as a kind of open-ended relationship in which you can make your friend part in any of your projects and enterprises in a way that you cannot make a co-worker, a co-author, even kind of a student or whatever. So I think that is the difference. As I put it, friends give you robust numinal company. They are not just there for you given the activity you are currently engaged in. In fact, it's kind of open-ended. You can make them part of whatever enterprise you want to take on. So that is my answer. I don't know if it's a good one, but there it is.
Yes. I mean, I suppose I think the criticism of the answer is that if in the original sense it's too loose because it's open to the sort of objection I made, when you make it that the project that you're sharing with your friend has to be your life, it's perhaps making it too tight. I mean, one wonders whether there's more than one person with whom, under that definition, one's going to be a friend, or even with one person. I mean, I wouldn't even say that with my wife. There's a life, or your whole life is a shared project. There's a big part of your life which is a shared project, and there's a big part which isn't. And I think that's rather important, actually, for the relationships to work and not being stifling. But so I should perhaps unfairly take the position of chairing as well as having answered the question, not even to let you reply, because we should go on. But I really, and despite those objections and despite everybody's comments, I really enjoyed both the paper and the discussion after it. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you all. This was really, really interesting and valuable. Thank you.